Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a good lunch and some bubble tea. Alright, so let's start with our next session, which is where we are going to talk all about protecting sensitive information. Right, so securing data, regardless of it being on cloud, on premise, maybe on a file share, or maybe on a device, or maybe traveling from user A to user B, right? So we'll talk all about securing information, identifying sensitive information, regardless of where it is, right? So before we talk about that, let's talk about why, right? So why do we really have this need to talk about a comprehensive solution which covers on-premise, on cloud, on devices, everywhere, right? So if you look at some of the facts, a majority of the employees today are going to access corporate information through mobile devices, so that's over 40%. And over 85% of the enterprises keep sensitive information in the cloud. So this could be on authorized cloud applications, or this could be on unauthorized cloud applications that sometimes they don't know about, but their employees are going to use it anyway. And 88% of the organizations don't have enough confidence to detect and prevent loss of sensitive data, right? So you might have an experience implementing a DLP solution, but the confidence level of that, if you go by studies from analysts, says that there's not really a lot of confidence on DLP solutions alone to protect loss of sensitive information. Because at the end, it's a set of rules to detect sensitive information based on patterns, keywords, and it's not 100% security or protection against loss of data. And a majority of the cases, the loss of sensitive information doesn't happen intentionally, but it rather happens unintentionally. For example, you type an email and you intend to send it to Anil at Microsoft.com, but you happen to send it at Anil at Contoso.com because it just appears in your Outlook cache, right? So you happen to leak sensitive information by mistake more than doing it intentionally, right? So these are some of the reasons why we really need to have a solution which can cover or protect you against loss of sensitive information. Now in the past, and we spoke about this earlier in the morning session about the perimeter-based security, right? So where you have everything inside a network perimeter. You have your users coming into the office, working from their desktops. You have fixed devices. Majority of the time, even if they're connecting from home, they're coming through the VPN, which is still part of your perimeter network, just extended a bit outside of your physical office premise. Then you have applications which are sitting on premise, like SharePoint on premise, web applications, right, file shares, and then you have all of the data which is well within your network perimeter. So your security efforts basically go into securing the perimeter itself, right? So that's what happens in case of on-premise or private cloud. Now imagine what's happening now, right? So what's happening here is that a majority of these applications are actually being offered as an online service, right? So these are actually storing your data across data centers which are outside of your perimeter. So if you talk about, for example, Salesforce, OneDrive for Business, Box, Office 365, and these mobile devices, right? So it's well outside of your perimeter network. So now you need to now care about securing your information not only inside this perimeter, but also well beyond this perimeter. Wherever it is on the cloud, wherever it is on the mobile device, right? So that's what we are going to talk about now in this solution. So compliance is another big reason why companies need to really go behind securing sensitive data. I'm sure all of you heard about GDPR and a lot of these privacy laws coming and being drafted, across various countries. So it's becoming more and more important to identify sensitive information at the time of creation, so you take the right action to secure it at that moment, right? So you don't let it to be up to the next person who receives that information to secure it or not let it go outside of the authorized set of users. So there is a huge growth in the electronic data because of the adoption of cloud, obviously, and then more and more information being exchanged because people are more connected. They exchange more emails, they create more files, they create, So basically, with increased productivity, you see a huge growth in the amount of data which is being created, and only about 45% of over 41% of the organizations have stated challenges enforcing governance in the data, right? So it's one of the biggest challenges that they share, and 45% of the organization talk about governance being one of their biggest compliance risks. The reason is, if you talk about data, right, so it's mainly in two forms. It's in a structured form, where it is in databases, like a SQL database. That's where you know where the data is, right? So you know which column, which row stores sensitive information, and then you can take an action against that. You can take measures like masking the information, encrypting the information, but all within the database. When it comes to unstructured data, which is in the form of files, now this data can be on a mobile phone, this can be on a cloud service, this can be on premise on a file share, this can be on SharePoint, this can be on email. So it's quite difficult to implement or take the same approach as structured data, right? So that's the reason why most of these companies have a lot of challenges and lack of confidence in securing sensitive information when it is in the form of unstructured data. And in the session today, we are actually going to focus a lot more on how to secure, so before we secure, how to discover, how to classify, how to protect, and how to monitor the usage of sensitive information. So we basically break it down into 4 phases. So the first phase is detect, right? So when we say detect, it's about the ability to detect sensitive information when it's being created, when it's being modified, when it's being shared through email, when it's being shared through, let's say, OneDrive for Business, right? And then do the right classification. So classification is when you say, hey, this information is confidential in nature, or this information can be shared publicly, so we classify that as public information, right? Or this information is so critical for my business that I want to call it highly confidential information. So this is what we mean by classifying and labeling information. And when you know that the information is sensitive in nature, you got to apply the right protection. So it doesn't matter where it goes after that, the information is always protected, right? And once it is protected and shared or is being circulated between people within the organization or maybe even outside the organization, you need to have the ability to monitor the usage of that sensitive information and be able to track and revoke access if you think it's probably gone to wrong people by mistake or maybe on intention, right? So we'll talk about these 4 phases in detail, and we'll talk about what kind of measures or what kind of solutions do we provide across all these 4 phases in rest of the session. So if we talk about first the life cycle of a sensitive file, right? So when we say life cycle of a sensitive file, we talk about from the time the information is being created or imported or received by you. Let's say somebody from outside the company sent an email with sensitive data to someone in your company, right? So that's what we also consider as part of import or receiving sensitive information. Or a user is modifying a file which already contains sensitive information, or he modifies the file and puts in some sensitive information, right? So we talk about being able to discover sensitive information at the time of creation, import, or modification. So once we are able to discover and identify sensitive information, the first step that we take is classify and apply the right labeling on this data. Because once you apply the right labeling, what it does is it gives you additional parameters to filter. For example, your DLP solution can say, if an information or if a document is classified as confidential, I need to take a different action on it, right? For example, if a file is marked confidential, it needs to, let's say, CC the sender's manager to notify that this file is going outside the company. So you need to be a bit more careful about that, right? So it gives additional visibility for DLP solutions to take other actions. Apart from that, you can say that information is classified. It also needs to be protected because I don't know where all it goes once I send it out, right? So let's say if I'm a owner of a document and I need to send it to the next person, I cannot leave it up to him to do or to decide what to do with that. So it's me who needs to decide what to do with that file, right? So I apply the right classification, I apply the right protection, and these are the tools that you need to provide to your employees. And once that file is classified, labeled, and protected, it can go anywhere again, right? So like I spoke earlier, it can be on a file share, it can be on a mobile phone, it can be on a cloud service, which can be an authorized or an unauthorized cloud service as well. And you are able to monitor and revoke access, or you can say expire access, right? So I can send a file to 5 recipients within the company, and the information can be sensitive in nature, and I can say, this file expires after 5 days. So nobody else is able to access it anymore because it has validity only for 5 days. Or I can say every time someone opens the document, he needs to prove his access on that document again, right? Because maybe I decide by next morning that the person doesn't need to have access to that file anymore, right? So it's probably beyond his rights. So that's how you need to look at the life cycle of sensitive information. So we'll also talk about in various slides and demos how do we really cover that. So what is our approach as part of Microsoft? Our approach is to be able to help you detect, classify, label, protect, and monitor sensitive data across devices, which could be iOS, Android, Mac, Windows PC, on a browser, across cloud, any of the cloud services, as well as on-premise, on file shares, or maybe on-premise SharePoint library, right? So first, when we talk about detect, now, no matter where the information is, it's being created, it's being stored historically. Let's say you have file shares having information collected from past 10 years. You need to have you have to have the capability to scan through that and apply the right classification, labeling, protection on that data. It could be on a mobile device, it could be on a laptop, or it could be on a cloud service. So if we go in phases, if we say first talk about detect sensitive information on devices, right? So first one, let's say we talk about Windows PCs, Mac OS, iOS, Android, corporate issued devices, or be it employee-owned devices, right? So you need to be able to detect what is business data, what is non-business data, be able to segregate between corporate and personal information on these devices, and identify sensitive information on Office apps, because Office apps now can be accessed from any different types of devices, right? So we have Office on Mac, we have on PC, on iOS, on Android, on browser, so we need to be able to detect that. So what do we do for detecting sensitive information across cloud services and on-premise? So the previous slide was more about detecting information on devices. So if we talk about cloud services and on-premise, so we make use of built-in sensitive types. So for example, how to identify UK PII information, right? So it could be, let's say, UK passport number or EU passport number for GDPR, or EU driving license number. So we have these built-in information types or patterns, credit card numbers, debit card numbers, right? So we have more than 100 plus different information types which are built in and help you detect information across cloud services or on-premise. And you can also create your own sensitive information types. For example, there could be a new project which is confidential in nature, and it has a specific name. Let's say Project Longhorn or something, right? So you can look for those keywords which help you detect information which is confidential in nature belonging to that project. So you can look for your own custom sensitive information types for keywords, for document fingerprinting using forms, and you can also look at what other cloud applications people are using in the environment. So the IT says, for example, I don't allow the use of cloud apps, but your network, your logs from your network appliances give a different story. They say that people are accessing cloud applications already. Some department, let's say HR, said that, hey, my IT does not provide me any tools to share files, so let me buy a few licenses of a cloud application that helps me share files within the users, of my group, or maybe with people outside the company, or maybe exchange documents with the new recruits. So they go ahead and buy their own application, and the IT does not know about it, right? So we also need to understand the usage of such applications in the environment, and put your own custom queries for detecting sensitive data. So that's about detect phase, and we will do some demos around that later. So let's talk about the classification part. So once we have discovered sensitive information, what do we do after that, right? So we classify information. So we say that, hey, I detected that this file does have a lot of EU PII information. So what do I do with that next, right? So I look at the policy for my organization. I say, in my organization, all the PII data has to be classified as highly confidential, right? So what do I do then? I say, hey, this file has sensitive information which is matching this classification policy. So I need to apply highly confidential label on this file. So basically, we can do classification in 4 ways. The first one is when we allow the user to take the lead and apply the right classification, right? So it requires the users to be a lot more educated and aware. So you would expect, a certain level of maturity for users for you to trust users to apply the right classification, right? So they can specify what classification is appropriate for a file. Let's say I'm a user in finance department. I create a lot of, financial reports every quarter. So you can focus on educating me as an individual that, hey, you create all these financial reports, so you need to always apply a certain classification on these documents. But doing that at a scale of hundreds and thousands of users when people are dealing with sensitive information is a bit difficult. You can't pull in so many people in rooms, right? So you need to look at what you can do to educate them as they join in the role, for example, right? So you can't wait them to come to a training room every 3 months, right? So what you start doing is you start recommending them the right classification based on what information is there on the files or emails that they're working with, right? So there you come up with the recommended classification, right? So you start recommending them. Now they can accept the recommendation, they can dismiss the recommendation. If they change the recommendation, they got to provide justification, but what's happening is they are being educated as part of the process, right? So they are becoming more and more aware, and I'm dealing with sensitive information, and I need to apply the right classification on this information. The automatic classification is the most automated methodology, but of course, it requires a higher level of maturity in your policy, because if you start automatically classifying everything, it means there could be some rate of false positives as well, so users end up changing a lot. So the right way to start is start with giving option to users, doing some trainings, start recommending. Once you have attained a certain level of maturity, you see people mostly accepting the recommendation, then you upgrade to completely automated classification, right? And then you have a solution to basically easily tweak your policies, define these different policy recommendations, and based on that, you can define your own classification categories. That's what we call a taxonomy, and employees can work with it. So what is document labeling, right? So I spoke about classification and labeling. So what does labeling do? So basically a labeling puts some property or some additional value in document metadata, right? So it means it becomes part of the document property. So even if the document is encrypted, it cannot be read by your DLP or other solutions, let's say. They can still read the properties of the document, right? That's how they can index a number of files. So what you do by labeling, you put that value in the document properties, right? And so your other systems can actually consume that and take an action based on that. So it's just like putting a additional document property. Once you say I'm labeling this file as confidential. So its property will bear a value, say sensitivity equals to confidential, right? So that's what we do by labeling. And what are the actions that can be, driven with this, right? So protection actions across locations. So based on the classification and labeling, you can do different things, right? One of the very basic things that you can do is take a DLP action based on the classification of a document, or the built-in action of protect. So protect is going to be part of the built-in action of a label as well. So let's say a confidential label can say that a document cannot be accessed by anybody outside of my organization because it's meant for consumption within my organization, right? So we can take that as a default action when we, let's say, apply a confidential label. You can also take governance action based on the labels that you apply to documents. You can say, this document is confidential in nature, so it needs to exist in my storage or in my applications for next 7 years, and I can archive it after 7 years. Or, since it is containing PII information, I don't want to store it beyond 7 years, so I would basically, trash it after 7 years. So I can take these actions based on the classification that I define. And you can always define your own custom policies. So you can say policies which are targeted on specific groups or departments. For example, a confidential HR or HR confidential label can be different from confidential finance label, right? Because there are different set of people who needs to have access on these documents, right? So a finance guy does not need access to documents or confidential documents from the other department. So that's how you can customize your policies to target a specific set of people who have specific needs or sharing requirements within that group. Or you can say, let the end user define who is going to have access on that document. So if he needs to send it to one individual outside the company as a confidential document, he can apply that label and customize the permissions on the document. So you can do a lot of customization across the policies that you define. And like I said before, policy recommendations help you get started, because when you need to educate users, when you need to build that awareness, it's difficult to do that only through classroom trainings or videos, right? So you need to help them hands-on. When they're dealing with sensitive information, you need to suggest them, hey, this should be classified as confidential, or this should be classified as highly confidential. So your policy recommendation are a great way to get started. Here's an example, and I'll show more, right? So you have a confidential label applied on this document, and that's where you have a credit card match. So this document contains a credit card. That's where the user is getting a label automatically applied on the document, right? So user is being informed there is a reason why you have this label being recommended or automatically applied on this document. So it's very easy. I'll go back. So it's very easy for a user to have this information coming right on top of the document when he is working on the document, right? So he is getting a lot of education as part of the work that he is doing. So now let's talk about protect. So we spoke about discovery, classification, protect. So with protect, we actually have a lot many options. Like we can have a lot of controls. What do we really want to do about protecting sensitive information? Because it can be about the encryption at rest, right? So where you store documents on a local drive of the machine. So how do you really encrypt that drive itself, or the hard drive itself, so that in case that's lost or the device is stolen, you don't have to worry about loss of sensitive information which was there. A remote wipe, let's say the device is stolen, how do you really make sure that you don't leave any sensitive information on that device, right? How do you isolate sensitive data, which is, or I would say, how do you isolate corporate data from personal data, right? That's one of the other things that you can do. So you need to create a way to identify personal information from corporate information on the same device. And then we have, so those were the controls on the device. And if you look at cloud and on-premise, there are again a long list of these options available to us. It starts from file encryption, email encryption and rights management, permissions who have got access to what file or file share or a folder, DLP actions, so what happens if someone sends in information within or outside the company, policy tips, I'll show some of these demos as well. So how do you really notify the person that he is actually going to take a non-compliant action like sharing sensitive data with people outside, right, outside of the company. Visual marking, so even if someone takes a picture, you have the watermark still on the background of the document. Control and protect data on apps with granular policies like detect who is sharing with people outside, detect who is sharing with people inside, what's in those documents, right? And set the retention, expiry, and deletion of sensitive information, right? So we have a long list of these controls which can be defined or which can be part of your policy around information protection. So when we talk about protection, so these are the things which are going to help you against lost or stolen devices. So we spoke about this. Device encryption, we have BitLocker solution on the drive encryption, which is part of the operating system. One of the easiest ways to enable drive encryption for data at rest. Then we have the removable storage encryption. It's called BitLocker to go. So even if someone has to copy data to a USB drive and share with another person, you are making sure that he's carrying that data in an encrypted format, right? So let's say the USB was stolen, it will not be available to a wrong person easily, right? So he has to go through the encryption and decryption. A remote wipe, so if the device is stolen, you can easily perform a remote wipe from the online portal. So this is something we provide with Intune as a solution. So next we talk about the mobile device management capabilities. So we all know that you got to let users access corporate data from mobile phones. So how do we really make sure that they are coming from devices which are compliant? They have, let's say, encryption enabled, they have the right policies implemented, they are not jailbroken, they don't have malware sitting on those devices, right? So you need to be able to identify that or make sure that you are letting your people access corporate data from these devices, but those devices are not insecure or those devices are not going to compromise the corporate information or the sensitive information that you're going to allow to be accessed from those devices, right? So that's part of the Intune solution portfolio where we enable the device management, so controlling at the device level. And the very next is the mobile application protection, right? So that's where you say that I need to let my users access my corporate data, but only through the right applications, right? So when I say only through the right applications, it means applications where you can implement the DLP controls, where you can say that, hey, my user can access my email on an iOS device, but he cannot copy that and put it on his personal email, let's say, Outlook.com profile, right? Or the user got an attachment as a Word file, but he should not be able to copy that and put it in the local storage and send it out as an attachment through Gmail, right? So you need to be able to segregate information within apps that you provide to your users on mobile phones and make sure that they are not allowed from third-party apps where you don't have these controls, right? For example, there could be a developer building a very nice email application and someone in your company likes it, right? One of the users wants to use it. But that application does not have these controls. So if you let him use it, he can easily copy the corporate data intentionally or by mistake to personal profile, right? So the chances of information leakage are much higher. So the mobile application control helps you put encryption on the data, even when it is on the device, and access controls so that people need to use additional layer of security or level of security before they get into the application, sharing controls, copy-paste restrictions, so most of these things at the application level. We intend to do the same thing on a Windows PC through a solution that we have as part of the platform, which is Windows Information Protection. So the same thing as we do on iOS and Android, so we can call it containerization, right? So you separate the corporate versus personal data, and the same thing that we just spoke about on mobile phones, on iOS and Android, is something that we can also implement on Windows PCs, because we built that capability as part of the platform, right? That's the reason why we can't do the same thing on Windows XP or Windows 7, because your platform needs to be able to understand the isolation of corporate versus personal data as well, right, at the application level. So here's, it's a long one, but if you look at it across cloud, on-premise, and devices, if you got to secure sensitive information, you have various controls from revoking access from an application to putting visual marking, retaining expiry, controlling the cloud access, DLP actions, file level encryption and permissions, right? So these are various controls that we provide across on-premise, cloud, and the endpoints. And here's a very good example, and I will also do a quick demo on this, where the user is dealing with sensitive information, he is being notified through policy tips, or when he is working from a mobile phone, he is able to consume an encrypted document. He is seeing a policy tip when he's trying to share a file. So these are the additional controls that you're able to provide, right? So this further on the email encryption and rights protection. So when people have to send sensitive information through emails, there are built-in controls that say do not forward. So you receive the document, but you don't decide who else to send this to, right? Because it's meant for only your consumption. So this could be very well considered for a scenario where a finance guy needs to send quarterly end of quarter business report, right? So he only needs to send it to 10 more people, but don't let them decide what they do next, right? So he sends that email as do not forward, so those 10 people consume it, but it does not go any further, right? So the owner controls the information. So these are the controls which are provided for the email, and the same thing, even if he needs to send it to somebody at, who is using, let's say, a Google mailbox. So business to consumer support is also available. So you can send secure emails to someone using a Google mailbox, and it's not that he has to put any additional client or agent or anything. It's seamless, right? So he can receive sensitive information in an encrypted format on his Google mailbox as well. And one of the very important components is Cloud App Security, which helps you implement DLP controls across a wide variety of cloud applications. The reason why this is important is because you have a long list of cloud applications which is growing, right? So which is only growing every month, right? So you have Salesforce, Google, Box, Dropbox, Office 365, maybe a few more, right? So now, if you go to each and every one of these apps and define DLP controls, it's going to be a lot of additional headache for your administrators. So what do? So you get a single solution, which is Cloud App Security, which can talk to all of these cloud applications and then give you the similar level of DLP controls or file level controls, right? So what happens when somebody is uploading a file to Box and sharing it with people outside your company, right? So you got to be able to do the same thing for Box, the same thing for Salesforce, and the same thing for Office 365. So Cloud App Security becomes that one tool which helps you to implement these file level controls across these various applications, right? That's what we do with Cloud App Security. And governance is another important component where you say how long an information needs to be retained. and what should happen with it once the period has expired. Let's say confidential or documents tagged as confidential should be retained for 7 years, and after 7 years they should be deleted, or they should be archived, or the user should be notified to take an action on that, right? So who is the owner of that document? So data governance is also one of the key considerations for information protection. And at the end, the fourth phase is the ability to monitor and revoke access for people who should no longer have access on the documents, right? So when it comes to monitor, I think we need to have the visibility of who is violating your policies, who is sharing sensitive data outside of the company, who is sending through emails, right? So how many users are overriding your policies? They are taking a different action with a justification. So be able to take some actions like revoke access, quarantine a file, right, if it's non-compliant to your policy, quarantine the user himself. So having a visibility and governance action is one of the key abilities for the monitoring and revocation. So you need to know when a policy is violated, right? What is the effectiveness of your policies? So how many times a user has to override, or how many times do you see a false positive? And also very importantly, integrate with other systems, which means your DLP also should be able to take an action based on the classification that is being applied, right? Or maybe your DLP should also be able to apply the classification on a document if it detects that a document is going out with sensitive information. Or your CASB solution should be able to scan files on OneDrive for Business and apply the right classification, right? So that is what I mean by the ability to integrate. Or you should be able to integrate with the SIEM solution so that in case where there are alerts, it can forward those alerts to the SIEM solution, and you can correlate that with the user behavior. Let's say mass downloads of files, right? So user showed suspicious behavior on Azure AD, and the same user is downloading a lot of files to a new device outside of your company, right? So it means there is a correlation that you need to do between, or by using this information from two different solutions, right? So that is what I mean by integrating with other tools. And be able to log who is accessing documents from where, from which location, from what device, who is able to open the file, who could not open the file, maybe he's an unauthorized person, who's required to do an MFA when trying to open a file. So all of these abilities to monitor document sharing and access is also equally important. And also the usage of cloud applications. So I spoke about the shadow IT earlier, right? So people are using risky applications in your environment. So how do you know that, right? So you don't send an email to a department asking, hey, do you use any non-authorized applications, right? So that's not probably the best way to find out. So how do you know that, right? So very simple, you look at the network logs on the appliances, maybe also on the devices, the corporate devices, and you try to understand what applications are my employees accessing from these devices, right? So you analyze the logs and then look at the risk profiling of those applications. You say, how many of these applications are highly secure? How many of these applications are hosted in my region? How many of these apps are hosted in the risky locations, right? So you get all of that profiling. Also on compliance, do they follow GDPR? Do they follow ISO, right? So HIPAA. So depending upon what's your compliance requirement, and then you take an action based on that. So now, we spoke a lot about discover, classify, label, protect, monitor, correct? So let's try to look at how this really looks like for an end user. So we will do some demos now. So I'll exit the screen and let me let me try to open this machine, right? So I hope it's visible on the screen. And what I mean here is, let's say, if as a user, I'm trying to create a new email, right? And I say I put a user from outside the company, it's my personal Outlook account, and I say this document or this email contains PII information. So I've got some sample PII data. It is, let's say, UK passport number. And I try to send this. So what you see here is the user is first, by default, has a label called internal. When he tries to send it to a person, and the information in the email body contains a lot of sensitive data, it's primarily sample PII information, he is getting a recommendation. Now, let's say as a new employee, it's my day 1 in the company, or maybe day 7, it does not matter. And I have not yet gone through any trainings, nothing, and I happen to send some sensitive information on an email, right? So I get a notification immediately that it is recommended to label this file as confidential, all employees, because it contains sensitive data, right? So I can say, hey, yeah, I think my IT is really, giving me the right recommendation. If I'm sending and sharing it with a person outside the company, let me do that. But here's one more step, right? Because you are sharing a file or sending an email which is confidential in nature, you need to have a justification why you are doing this, right? So you need to tell, I confirm that the recipients are approved for sharing this content, or my manager has approved sharing of this content, or give a justification, right? So if you don't do that, you cannot send this file, right? So what you're doing is, you're making sure you're choosing either one of the given justifications, which are more of a standard, or you're providing a detailed justification, why do I need to send this sensitive data outside of the company, and then you can send that email, right? So that's one of the very good examples of detecting sensitive data as I create that data, right? There could be another example if I am sending another email to the same person, and I'll say a test email, but instead of copying the PII data, I say this information is confidential. So here I'm looking for a keyword called confidential, right? So I'm not looking for PII data, I'm not looking for passport numbers, I'm only looking for a keyword, right? When I send this email is sent, right? It did not stop me from sending that email at that moment, but if you go back and check in the sent items, and if you open this email, this is actually automatically classified as highly confidential, right? So it did not give any option to the employee to choose or give a justification, but because I'm looking for a keyword which is very sensitive in nature, I'm automatically applying a highly confidential label on this email, right? So this is something where the employee can be notified if you choose to notify, but if you think certain information types are too sensitive in nature, you automatically take an action, and yeah, you can notify them later that, hey, we took this action on this email, and it was sent as highly confidential and protected to the person that you sent to, right? So this is an easy way. Now, if you look at creating a Word document, let's say I create a Microsoft, let's say I close this. Now, so I come outside of this, do a right click, and say create a new Word document. Let's say give a random name, and try to do the same thing on this document, right? Copy all this sensitive data, and if I try to save this, this is going to get a recommendation, and I can say change now or dismiss, and if I say change now, it is going to change it. If I say dismiss, it will not apply the label, but I can always go and check that all of these events are captured in the event viewer, or I would say in the local event viewer of this machine, and then we collect them on a centralized portal as well. So I can say go to my application logs and then go to the Azure information protection logs after that, and then see what happened when I got a recommendation to apply a label, right? So this was the incident. I'm not sure if it's visible on the screen. I can say Windows plus. Yeah. So basically the event is captured on the machine. The recommendation bar was dismissed by the employee, right? So we are basically making sure that we capture every incident of someone not accepting the recommendation made by the tool, right? So we can exit this now and then look at, so this was part of the recommendation. This is where you see that the information was recognized as sensitive as the person was creating a file, modifying a file, sending an email, right? Or maybe he's creating a document online. Now, once we protect, I think we already saw in my first session, basically a person trying to download a file from internet, right? So maybe a file which is not protected. The moment he downloads it, it got encrypted. So basically he cannot access without authentication. There could be many such examples of a person creating a new file over the browser as well. So the same thing that I did on a machine, on a Windows 10 PC, I can do the same thing absolutely on a browser, and then make sure, okay, so it needs me to verify my password. It needs me to verify the multi-factor authentication. The reason this is happening is because I am actually accessing sensitive information on my machine, on the browser. Right, so I created this file earlier, but I can always create a new file. I'm getting a monitored access. I can say continue to OneDrive for business, and then I can take the same action. So in the meantime, what I will do is I'll show how do we really monitor a sensitive document, or let's say I create a sensitive document on OneDrive for business. How do I really automatically discover and classify that? So I do this by the tool CloudApp Security. So I go to policies here and say I'm looking at file policies, and these file policies can actually define what I'm looking for. So I can say look for files stored on OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online or Box with EU PII data, and I can go ahead and modify the settings of this policy. And in this, I can say look for files which are shared either publicly or internal or private, does not matter, but as long as they contain the EU PII sensitive information, right? So EU PII sensitive information, I need to take an automatic action of applying a classification label, right? So this is what I meant by having the ability to scan through files which are historically stored on OneDrive or SharePoint Online and apply an action automatically. You can also say, put this file in a quarantine, make it private, remove external people from this file. So many of these actions that can be taken, right? So this policy, by the way, has 116 matches, right? So what that means is it has already found and automatically protected over 116 files, right? So you see, this is the file I created a little while back before doing this session. It already says that this file is already protected by Azure Information Protection Policy, and it does have 2 policy matches, right? So if you go and open this, it will tell you what are those matches. It will mask the sensitive information. However, it will show you a few keywords if you enable. And similarly, for the PII data, it says last 4 characters of the of the PII content which was found on this file is being reflected. It's some identity card number, and it matches the policy called PII information on cloud apps, right? So this is what this is telling you is, even if your employees create documents online or from mobile phones, from PCs, they store it on cloud, it is able to actually scan sensitive information and apply the right classification, labeling, and protection on those files, right? Now, at the end, what happens when these files are shared with people, right? So we saw that the files which contain sensitive data, which are shared outside the company, you are able to take an action on that. But let's say there is a file which has been shared by me as an owner with people inside or outside the company, right? So I can track how many people were allowed to access this file and how many were denied. So how many users have viewed this successfully and how many people were denied access to this file. So this is about 19 instances of someone being denied access to this file. It means someone was really trying to access this file, right? So you see all of these personal IDs, a corporate ID, another personal IDs of people trying to access this file on certain dates and denied access. You can also go to the map view. So if you go to the map view, it tells you from what all locations someone tried to access the file. So you can keep clicking on this. It tells you the exact location from where someone was trying to access the file, right? So this particular instance, for example, is tracked to, let's say, Singapore, right? So someone is trying to open this file from there, and these are the identities that the person used in so many cases, right? So you would also notice that the access to this document is already revoked, right? So I revoked this access because I think someone was trying to access it and he was not the right person. If it was not revoked, then I would ideally see that option right here at the bottom, right? And also the Cloud App Security, if you go to the activity logs or to the file logs, it actually tells you every single instance of someone accessing a file from what location. It can be a person outside of the company, it can be a person inside the company. So someone is trying to access the file, here's the guy, and here's the application, this device, this location, again, the ISP-based location. So it gives you all of these details. So what happens is, every file which someone shared through OneDrive, even if I access it from my personal ID, let's say Outlook, it will capture that event, right? So you always know who is sharing this file with whom, who is trying to access that, who is trying to create a share, who is trying to share a sensitive file. So all of that visibility is provided to you. The same thing is something we do for on-premise environment as well through a solution called AIP Scanner, which can cover file shares, it can cover on-premise SharePoint libraries, right? So, and also it can give you a centralized view in the usage report, right? So here's a nice dashboard of what label employees are applying. So there are over 30 labels which have been applied, and there have been 30 labels which have been applied in total. Out of that, 19 labels have protection, correct? So 19 labels, in 19 cases, people also protected a file. It must be a confidential or a highly confidential label, which includes document protection. It tells you how many labels were applied by people, right? So there have been highly confidential label applied. So this is the yellow one of the big bars, big pies here. Internal end user, so there have been 30 cases. These would be most likely done by Cloud App Security because that's where I've configured it. Confidential all employees 6, right? So you get this nice view, and you can always click further to go into details, and you can see a timeline. You can see how many users are interacting, how many protect incidents have happened, and what is the trend, right? So you can go by last 3 days, last 31 days, last 7 days, last 14 days, and you can also see every single activity as it happens. So if you see, here's the file which I just created on my machine when I was doing a demo, so TW6, and at 2:16 p.m. what is the activity? It's access, right? So what is the label applied on it? Internal. The test email I sent, highly confidential. So if I click on this, it tells you more details, right? So what's the level of confidence? How many instances of this type? What is the activity? Applying a new label, right? Protection type, from what type of device? What is the name of the device, right? What is the label name? So you basically get all these details captured at one place, at one dashboard, right? So this is what I mean by having centralized visibility. So with this is what I wanted to cover in a demo. So from discover, classify, label, protect, and monitor. And yeah, so those are the 4 phases. So I'll go back to the presentation mode. Right, so this is what we covered: detect, classify, protect, monitor on device, on cloud, and on-premise. So I think on-premise is not what I demoed, but this is something we support through AIP scanner. So this is basically a solution covering all of these 4 phases across different different locations where the information, the unstructured information, can reside. So here is a quick summary of what are the tools that we spoke about across devices, cloud services, and Office 365 overall, and also on-premise. So we have Windows Information Protection, we have BitLocker, we have Intune, MDM, and MAM. On the endpoint side, we have Office 365 DLP, where you are able to detect the sensitive information being created or being modified by employees, advanced data governance, Azure Information Protection, and Cloud App Security. So these are various tools which work together, integrated with each other, and cover across various locations in your enterprise. So with this, I want to do a quick summary overall, right? So what is the Microsoft story for information protection? It's a combination of what I covered in the morning with identity and access management, with the concept of zero trust, and also the information protection components which I spoke about just now, right? So with this, if you look at different types of devices, mobile devices, domain-joined PCs, compliant PCs, unmanaged PCs, like the personal device, the home device, and infected or risky devices, right? So where you think it's going to compromise your sensitive data. On the right-hand side, you have your cloud services and your on-premise services, right? So that's why the concept of consider everything over the internet, right? So even the on-premise services are published over the internet for the user. And when he comes from these devices, the first layer of defense is Azure Active Directory, the single sign-on and the conditional access and the MFA. That's what we spoke about in the morning. So as a first layer of defense, it helps you determine, is it a compliant device? Is it a domain-joined device? Is it an Intune managed device? Who is the person? So once it goes through that, the device can directly connect to the service. However, in case where the device is not a domain-joined device, not a compliant device, it's an unmanaged device, you say browser-only access from such a device, that goes through the Cloud App Security session control. So you can say monitor download, or block download, or apply a label and protection on download, right? So that's an action that you take. And in case the device is compromised, the device is a risky device, you can say block access from such a device. And on each of these devices, you have the information protection controls. So for example, on iOS and Android, you have the label and protection, you have the Intune, MDM, and MAM. On a managed or domain-joined device, you have group policy, BitLocker, Windows Defender, you have AIP label and protect. On an unmanaged device, you have limited access because you can block native applications, and you have label and protect for Office web apps, right? Because you're blocking native apps, but you can still allow an employee to apply labels and protection and consume that over the browser itself. On Office 365, you have the DLP built in for Exchange Online, for OneDrive for Business, for Teams, right? So you can put sharing controls, You can put content scan on sharing. You can say label and protect, right? And when it comes to the cloud services in general, you have the Cloud App Security connecting through API, getting visibility into all of the activities, files being uploaded, created, downloaded, so that all that visibility comes through Cloud App Security. So you have various actions that you can do, including malware scan on files stored on cloud, right? And it integrates with AIP to apply the classification, labeling, and protection on data stored in these services. Next to that, you have the ability to extend a lot of these capabilities on-premise through AIP Scanner, through AIP SDK. So let's take an example, someone exporting data from SAP, right? So the data is sensitive in nature, so you want to export, and at the time of export, classify, label, and protect, right, at that moment. You have the reverse proxy, so that's where you say block download or, the reverse proxy that helps you publish applications which are web applications over the internet, right? And at the end, you have the Cloud App Security helping you scan the applications that people access in your environment. So it scans and integrates with your proxy and firewall and scans that data and gives you the visibility into sensitive or the risky applications which are being accessed by employees, right? So sometimes you don't know about what they're accessing. So this is, in a nutshell, the overall information protection approach from Microsoft. It includes identity, it includes DLP, it includes the endpoint controls, it includes Cloud App Security and AIP, right? Shadow IT. So it's all integrated and giving you a single point of control across your enterprise for unstructured data. Okay, so with that, I think I would wrap up my session here. If there are any questions on the online interface, I can take those questions. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching, and please feel free to post your comments, any questions, and we can respond back to that. Thank you very much.